Hi everyone, welcome back to our St Mike's Youth Wednesday sessions. We are so excited for everything that is coming up this term. On our Wednesday sessions, we are going to be running a series of big questions on faith, such as, is God loving in the Old Testament? Or, what is the deal with angels? Thank you for those of you who have got your questions into me. But if you're sitting there thinking, oh no, I had a question, but I forgot, don't worry, it's not too late. You can still send your questions in, and we will do our best to fit them into the rota later on in the term. This week, however, is going to look a little bit different. Seeing as it's the first week back, I thought I might run a little refresher, maybe, for those of you who have been part of the youth before, and for those of you who are joining new this year. This is going to be looking into why we do what we do in FXG and in Word, and to look in a couple of the key values that we hold for these groups. So without further ado, let's get on to the first one. So the first of these values, being real. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by being real? Well, in short, it means that we aim for FXG and Word to be places where we can be ourselves, where we don't have to put up a front or act a certain way in order to be liked, accepted, or to feel qualified. Let me tell you a story of a young man named Jack, who I used to work with at my old church. Now, Jack was quite new to faith. He'd only been a Christian for a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact. We had managed to invite him along to a youth residential where we hoped he would continue to meet with Jesus and build his faith. But I had noticed that for the first few days, Jack continued to stand on the edge of almost everything that we did. Now, I eventually got him to open up, and he told me that seeing loads of people with their hands in the air and while they're worshipping God with their eyes closed, others jumping up and down, it made him feel like he didn't belong. He felt pressure to join in because, as far as Jack could see, that's what worship looked like. And if you weren't doing that, then obviously you weren't sorted. I had to explain to Jack that a lot of the people there were a lot less sorted than they looked like, but they were at that moment simply lost in worship to a loving God. Valuing realness means that we need to be a place for the unsorted. Because Christian life isn't about being sorted. The Christian life involves walking as the best we can alongside Jesus. We only have to look at the life of Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, to see this. In Luke 5, we see Peter being called by Jesus, but even then, he was afraid. In Mark 4, Peter is in the middle of the storm with the other disciples in the boat, and the storm is whipping up around them, and they go to Jesus, and Jesus calms the storm. And Peter is arguably more frightened of Jesus after calming the storm than he was of the storm itself. In Matthew 14, Peter tries to walk on water, but stops focusing on Jesus and starts seeing and being scared of the waves and begins to sink. Peter was one of the disciples who wanted to send the hungry people away from Jesus at the feeding of the 5,000. Now, even after realizing that Jesus was the Messiah, Peter tries to stand in Jesus' way and say, no, you're not going to die. Even after witnessing Jesus' very own transformation on the mountainside when he was transformed in glory, Peter still didn't understand. And Peter was a man who rebuked people for trying to bring children to Jesus. He was the man who insisted he would never betray or disown Jesus, and then promptly does so. And upon seeing the risen and resurrected Jesus, Peter was a man who still doubted. He was far from the sorted follower of Jesus that we can sometimes pretend to be. But despite all of his fears and his failings, Peter still walked alongside Jesus when others turned away or gave up. He was on a journey of growth and transformation. The same is true for us. We are not sorted. We, like Peter, are on a journey, and that will only end when Jesus returns or we die to go to be with him. Valuing realness means that we need to be a place for the unsorted. And it means that we need to be a place for the people who struggle. Walking with Jesus is often described as a struggle. We can see that again from Peter's life. Paul, when writing most of his letters to the early church, highlights the struggles that he and the church would face or have faced when choosing to follow Jesus. If you feel like your journey is 2 steps forward and 1 step back, then you're in good company, so don't worry. Don't despair. FXG and Word need to be a place for strugglers, so you are very welcome. Thirdly, valuing realness means that we need to be a place for the doubtful. We sometimes feel like we don't fit in or that we don't deserve to follow Christ because we have doubts, or at least I certainly do. But when Jesus appeared to his disciples after his resurrection, the Bible says that some of them doubted. Immediately after this comes Jesus' Great Commission, where he entrusts the building of his church to his disciples. Now, it doesn't say Jesus took those who believed. Jesus took those who believed straight away, and the disciples that doubted equally, and said, "Go, make disciples." We need to be a place that welcomes the doubtful. Now, lastly, on this first point of being real, we need to be a place for the sinner. Now, Jesus made a habit of hanging out with people that were not just not sorted, but were actively the opposite. Zacchaeus was a tax collector who stole from his own people and worked for the Romans. He was hated by everyone who knew him. But Jesus befriends him and brings him back to a life following him. We want to be a place for the sinner, but it's not quite that easy. Because whilst Jesus spent time with sinners and he befriended sinners, he did not tolerate their sin. When Paul writes about his struggles, he says, like, the things that I know to be good, I do not do. And the things that I know are bad, these are the things that I do. So being a place that welcomes sinners means understanding sin is a reality. We all struggle with it, but crucially, we do not ignore it. We actively fight against it and help one another in our struggles. Now, the second value that I wanted to look at today is that of cherishing. Now, the Bible tells us that the mark of being Jesus' disciple is love. In John 13:35, Jesus says this to his followers. He says, "This is how people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Now, I've said it before, but love is the logo of God's kingdom. There are a number of different stories when it comes to love being told to us by the world today. You might recognise a couple of them. Love is equal to physical intimacy, or you should love, but make sure it has its limits. Only love the people who personally benefit you and make sure you cut off the people that don't. But Jesus tells us a different story of love. In the preceding verse, Jesus contextualizes his command to love one another with these words: "As I have loved you, so you must love one another." And he says this shortly after removing most of his outer clothes, getting down onto the dirty floor and washing the muck and the filth off his disciples' feet. Throughout his life, Jesus models the strong, practical, and sacrificial love that he calls his followers to. A form of love that would lead one person to give up their life for another. Now, some people might say that the word cherishing doesn't quite fit into the youth work context, but I think it well represents this costly, practical love where we put each other first, we raise each other up, and hopefully become a place where people want to be. Now, the examples and the practicalities of this value might look a little bit different in this time of digital youth work. Normally, I would talk about friendship cliques and how they leave a danger of leaving the odd person on the boundary, or ensuring how every person who walked through the door at FXG or Word was accepted, welcomed, and said goodbye to. So now I might talk about the blank Zoom screen of always having your camera off, or maybe going out of your way to send a message to somebody who you've never seen before on the Zoom call. Or maybe now I should talk about noticing when somebody who regularly comes doesn't turn up, and remembering to just drop them a message to see if they're okay. These are small things, but they all take some level of sacrifice. And in doing so, we take that loving step that Jesus shows. We step out towards one another. These are not just things for leaders to do, but for anyone intent on this value of cherishing, of showing that everybody who comes to FXG and Word is loved and accepted. You all have a role in this. I'm not saying these things because you guys don't do them. We've seen this so often. We've seen these values in you guys so often. But I say it just to remind us and to encourage us all, especially in this time when it is not easy to be a community. Take that extra step and cherish one another. So there we have two of the values that we hold for the youth work at St Mike's. We're about to join back to Zoom groups to discuss the questions below further. But in a little, I feel, relevant twist to our normal sign off. Cherish one another. Keep connected. And we'll see you on the other side. Bye.